you just really need to understand your customer in depth, who is your customer and why are they buying from you? And what is it exactly that the brand promises that you are giving them? When they think about your brand, what is it that they think about that they are getting from you that is of high value that they cannot get elsewhere? If you can nail those things, you've kind of nailed the brand.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. Before we get into today's conversation with Trufan CMO Karen O'Brien, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to leave us a positive rating and review, share this episode with a friend, and subscribe to the show. But a brand new interviews every single Monday, and a brand new takeaways episode is an audio exclusive where I sit down and break down the most recent podcast episode of the week every single Thursday. And now, without further ado, I'm very excited to present to you my conversation with Karen O'Brien. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. And today on the podcast, we are joined by Trufan CMO and award-winning international marketing executive, Karen O'Brien. If you've been listening to the podcast for a little while now, you will recognize Karen from our monthly social report episodes and even flashing all the way back to episode number 78, where Karen made her first appearance on the podcast. And I'm very excited to have her back on the show today. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jacob.
No, my pleasure. I'm excited to have you back on the show. And kind of before we dive into things fully, I wonder if you give a quick context to the audience on what Trufan and Playr are and kind of how they work.
Sure. I mean, Trufan is basically a social audience intelligence platform. And what we are able to do is help marketers to find insights about their audience and then also to find new audiences. With Playr, basically, that is our B2C community. Today, we have 800,000 highly engaged gamers on that platform, and over time, hope to grow that beyond what it is today.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you were the first investor in a Trufan, right?
Yeah, Swish and I talked early on before he established Trufan. We talked about some things that I would love to be able to do as a marketer that I was unable to do, specifically being able to get down to the audience that I had in my social following. And Swish had some ideas on a company he wanted to build. And so I said, if you ever build that company, let me know. And very soon after that, I was writing my first check.
That's awesome. So last time we did an interview, like obviously you're on the monthly episodes with the social report, but last time we did an interview it came out March 2020. So we recorded around February 2020. And at the time you were strictly an investor into Trufan, but around August, I believe you came on as CMO. And I'm curious why you decided to come on board to Trufan and kind of go from, because looking at your previous experience with some big brands, what drew you back into the startup world?
I mean, I was intrigued by what Trufan was doing. And like a lot of people, I think during COVID, I had some self-reflection about where my career was going and what I wanted to be able to do. And although I was enjoying building those large global brands, at the same time, I was itching to build something from the ground up that could be meaningful. And I was absolutely loving the way that Trufan's direction was going, that we were basically democratizing social data for a lot of marketers and making it very, very easy to do things that have been very complex in the past. And so the opportunity to build a brand from the ground up was really fun and intriguing. And when Swish said, hey, why don't you come on board and help us with marketing, I jumped at the idea.
And is there still even like being excited and just working with the company you want to work at, is there still an adjustment to going from working at such a big brand to a startup? Like I'm assuming there's got to be some different processes, different procedures, everything. So is there a bit of an adjustment period for you?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, some things, working in social in large brands, you're always the most agile because you're the person who's talking to the customer day in and day out. You're dealing with constant changes that are happening on social platforms. Just by the sheer nature of the volume of social, you sort of have to be startup like within a large company. And so I've always been sort of in that world and kind of thought of myself as always having one toe in startups because of it. But I think the adjustments have been very positive. I mean, we have a very young, high energy team. And so that's been super fun for me to work with people of all different backgrounds and ages and perspectives, that has been really, really fun. I would say just also going back to sort of guerrilla marketing and grassroots. Not having big budgets makes you be super innovative. Having to deal with COVID, like a lot of marketers have, has made us really be quite purpose driven in how we're approaching the company. And it's been wonderful, honestly.
I'm curious on your perspective, kind of flashing back, like more so advice to people who are just entering the workforce. As someone who's worked both in startups and with big brands, where would you recommend people start their careers? Is it going to a startup where you're going to do a lot really quickly, or is it to work somewhere big, whether it be agency or even just a bigger brand, where you can kind of see the back end of something like that machine? And what would be a good starting point for someone's career?
Boy, I think that's so subjective to what you want to do and who you are. I think that just trying a lot of things, period. I mean, if you can get yourself into a startup that will allow you to have a lot of autonomy and really try out a lot of things and, sort of get a lot of experience that would be very difficult to get maybe in a larger or very specific role, do that, because then you're going to understand what you like and don't like. You can get that kind of experience also in an agency where you're wearing a lot of hats, working a lot of different brands, working a lot of different roles. But I would say startup is going to really throw you into the deep end of the pool right away.
Mhm. And so when you came on board Trufan, what were some things you identified kind of right away as things, not necessarily, but things to work on?
Well, we definitely needed to work on the brand, but that's a little bit difficult to do. It's chicken and egg when you're a startup, you're trying to build a brand and you're trying to have performance marketing. I kind of ascribe to a theory or a point of view now of around something that I would call performance branding, that you're building the brand while you're doing performance marketing. It's not an easy thing to do, but I see the direct to consumer brands doing it really, really well.
Mhm. And I mean, like, we're going to dive deep into the brand, but kind of on that note of performance branding, with a startup and it being, to your point, you don't necessarily have the big budgets to do so. How do you kind of balance those two things between wanting the performance branding? Because the combination of both having the brand and the performance marketing, like, how do you balance those two things?
I think you need consistency in messaging. And you need to be really clear about who you are, what you do, and who you're marketing to. I think the challenge with startups, though, is that you start to evolve as you grow, right? So in our case, we acquired a couple of companies that greatly expanded our abilities and functions, and that changed a little bit of who we were. And so, as you change and evolve, then you also need to change and evolve your branding and your messaging. So that's an ongoing challenge.
I'm curious. I mean, branding was one of the things you identified. I'm sure there was multiple other things that you were like, we need to work on these. I'm curious, when you come in, how do you figure out what sequence to do things in? Because you can try and do everything at once, kind of have a shotgun approach, but how do you figure out what order to kind of check these things off that need to get changed?
Mhm. Well, all marketing starts with understanding who you're marketing to, who's your customer. So in our case, it's enterprise marketers, it's agencies and influencers. And so for us, really understanding a lot more about our customers' needs, what their day was like, what challenges they were facing, what we could help solve, that was key in a starting place. Beyond that, then you want to understand your competitive set and where you're positioned, because there's a lot of noise out there, and particularly in B2B SaaS. And so we wanted to make sure that we were well positioned and that we were clear about who we were and what we were offering. And then above and beyond that, you want to break through the noise. You want to have a distinctive brand that really gets people's attention. I think also when you're up against large competitors that have huge tech budgets, that's even more important.
And how do you determine when it's time to do a rebrand like this? Because if, like, to your point, startups evolve so quickly, and I just look back to where Trufan was even last time we recorded the podcast, it almost feels like it's changed two or three times in the last 12 months. So how do you determine when is the right time to start devoting time and resources to and money to doing a rebrand?
hmm Well, I mean, for us, we are unifying our product and brand with the companies we acquired. So that's a huge opportunity because you've got to really, be clear and have a very purposeful um, marketing effort around making sure that people understand what the unified offering is, right? So that for us was the biggest opportunity. We've acquired a company, Playr, And now it's time to rebrand and refresh that brand to show the unified offering. Say also, we landed our seed funding. So that helps because then you have a little bit of money to be able to start putting out marketing in the world.
Mm-hmm. And when Playr does get acquired, does that, like to your point, was a rebrand kind of in your plans prior to that, to the announcement of the acquisition? Because you came on in August, I believe the acquisition was November. So in that little timeline before that, the Playr acquisition was being talked about, were you still planning to do a rebrand, or does acquiring Playr kind of force the hand of, okay, now we have to do the rebrand?
I think what we were thinking of before the Playr acquisition was to really just to start establishing the brand, really getting it out there and evolving it. And then once Playr was a reality, then it kind of forces things because you've got to really think through from your customer's perspective, what exactly is Trufan and what are we offering? And has that changed with the acquisition?
Mm. And now I want to go through the branding process. I kind of want to touch on just branding elements in general, and then we'll kind of circle back and talk about how they all apply to Trufan through this process. And I feel like a lot of people, they misconstrue when they hear the term branding, they think of like a color or visual scheme for the company and that's it. But I know branding is more than that. So can you kind of touch on all the different elements that make up a brand beyond just the colors you use for your company?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. So, there's a lot of confusion, I think, especially with marketers that are early in their career about what really is the brand. And so, what you're referring to with sort of our colors, our logo, our visual identity is basically what I would call a brand identity. So, the swoosh logo of Nike, for example, immediately recognizable, but immediately so is the just do it that goes along with it. And so the brand identity, although it does start with the logo and goes into sort of the way that you are applying creative and color through your whole visual identity, it does go beyond that into messaging as well. Another element would be your positioning. So, how are you positioning yourself relative to competitors and in the market? And are you a premium product? Are you a low cost product? Are you, what's your image that you're wanting to put out there? And how are you positioning yourself against others?
And it all kind of tracks back to your mission, your vision, your purpose, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of building on the mission, the vision, and the purpose. There's also values is incorporated there as well. But on top of values, there's also this thing called your value proposition, but that's different from your values. So I was wondering if you kind of explain the difference between the values and value prop.
Sure. So the values are basically the values that you embody and practice day to day. And at Trufan, we have sort of mapped out our own values and the things that we're willing to live as a brand day to day. Your value proposition is actually what your offering is to your customer. And so it embodies the entire offering of what you're promising to customers and what you're delivering.
Okay. And with customers, like I'm assuming customers remain top of mind through the entire branding process, right?
Absolutely. Everything stops and starts with the customer.
And how do you determine who, when you're doing a branding exercise like this, how do you determine who that customer is? Is it who's currently using our product or who we want to be using our product?
It's both. You always want to lead into who is actually using your product and who your actual customer is. And then, every brand also has aspirations of who they would like to grow into. It may be more just scaling into that customer that you already have, or it may be also growing into new segments. And so, that can be a strategic path. For us, we are focused today on enterprise marketers, but we would love to scale that more. But we are also, have customers that are secondary to that, which could include the agencies of those enterprise customers and could include influencers that are big enough to have a business.
Okay. And another thing too that I wanted to ask you about as it kind of factors into this brand archetypes, like how does that differ from a brand itself?
hmm Brand archetypes are sort of like personas that give you a way to sort of lean into the emotions of the brand. And so, we mapped out with an agency partner our brand archetypes and was I think it was a little bit surprising. Some of it was surprising, some of it wasn't. But it helped us to really lean into what are the emotions that we are invoking with the kind of brand that we are creating, or what do we want to invoke.
And can you mention the agency? Maybe we'll have to cut this out if we can't talk about it, but you worked with an agency. I'm curious why you made that decision instead of kind of trying to do it all internally.
Yeah, we were looking for somebody to really help us who had expertise in that area and give us an outside in view. We work with RDB out of Vienna, Austria, and they're a fantastic agency that I've worked with in the past, and I think that they build really great purpose-driven brands. And so we were looking for their help in just giving us some outside perspective on how we can really unify um, Trufan and Playr and really come to a great place in between.
How important is that outside perspective when you're going through an exercise like this? Because I feel like you get so caught up in the day to day that having a fresh perspective can really benefit you.
Yeah, I think like anything, I mean, branding is what they do. And so, giving somebody that task from the outside in to give you their expertise, give you their unfiltered opinion, I think is super helpful. At the end of the day, though, our customers will decide if our brand is effective or not. I'm a big advocate for the customer giving us feedback.
And how do you go about collecting customer feedback on something like that?
Mhm. I mean, some of it can be anecdotal, it can be conversational. People will tell you if they like or don't like your brand, but also growth. Is it, are we able to effectively grow our marketing presence? Can we use the color palette we have chosen in an effective way? Can we, bring the brands together and it makes sense now with the messaging? Are customers responding to our new marketing?
And how do you attribute an attribution for the new branding? Because at the same time, especially in a startup environment, while you're launching a new brand, you're also probably scaling up the marketing side of it as well. So how do you attribute what's coming based off the back of doing a bunch of performance marketing that wasn't happening in the past versus this new branding?
Yeah, that's a lot. But I would say, again, it's anecdotally. Do customers respond positively, favorably to the new branding? But also, can you land that branding and that new marketing in market in a way that is being positively received by customers? And is your team able to use it in a way that feels like the company still? Takes a little while for the team because, and I'm sure you've seen a little bit of that firsthand. But any brand that I've ever worked in that's done a refresh, it takes a little while for the internal teams and the agencies to really embrace it, really work with it. But once they do, you'll see very quickly if it's working or not working.
And can you kind of share what that process looks like, kind of what rebranding it looks like for a company, but how RDB then factors into that? But also, I'm assuming it's not like the whole team's involved. Like, how do you factor in kind of the rest of the C suite into these decisions versus also balancing with RDB while also working with the marketing team? Like, how do you kind of balance everyone's opinions and let that kind of whittle down into what the brand becomes?
Yeah, it's difficult because people have very strong opinions about creative, especially. And if they're founders or people who've worked in the company for a while, then they're also, very emotionally invested in where the company is at the moment. But I would say that again, if we are the advocate for the customer, the only thing that matters at the end of the day is our brand going to reflect us and is it going to resonate with our customer? Um, RDB will help us sort of give that outside in perspective, but also give us some thought provoking directions to look at, right? So with branding agencies, they will give you a view of your current brand, and they will suggest ways that it needs to pivot in order to be relevant, in order to scale and be extensible for you. Sometimes you can have a brand that is very effective in digital, but may not translate into other areas of the business.
When it comes to kind of working with the agency and everything like that, where do you start with this process? Because it feels like a very involved process. Are they there from day one, or is there stuff that happens internally first before reaching out to the agency? Like, how does this process even look? What does it look like, and where do you even start?
I think starting with an agency that you can really articulate to them who you are, what you do, and then asking for their help in, are we articulating that in the right way in our brand? And a good agency will be able to look at that from multiple perspectives. They'll be able to look at it from your brand identity, your brand voice, how are you executing and then showing up? in the world with that? And then where do you want to be as a brand? And how are customers perceiving that? All of those things take a little time and sometimes they evolve regardless of where you start with your brand. For us, one of the things that we really wanted to do with this brand refresh was really bring our brand voice to the table. We felt like internally our teams are really high energy and young and fun. And we have a lot of, like, we work hard, but we play hard too. And so, we have a lot of team activities where we do gaming and all sorts of fun, internal sort of team building things. But I would also say the team communicates through GIFs and emojis and all sorts of fun things on Slack too. And overall, the team has kind of an edgy voice. And so we wanted to bring a little bit of that to our marketing. And so I feel like we're starting to do that a little bit. We also wanted to bring, the kind of insights that we were seeing through our own platform. And so one of the things that I am a strong advocate of doing audience marketing, and Trufan's product allows us to really be able to create some amazing insights around audiences. So we started a content series for enterprise marketers that's going to highlight some high value audiences. I think doing things like that, being of service and being helpful to the people who are your customers is really the way to go with our brand, because our brand is about creating insights. It's about helping marketers to find their audiences and to find new customer segments. So the more that we can demonstrate that to our customers through our brand, I think the better.
I kind of want to unpack the brand, both the Trufan and the Playr brand, and then how they kind of molded in together. So I kind of want to talk about what different elements of the branding are and why those were the decisions that were made. So can you just kind of refresh everybody again what the platform is that will which reinforces what decisions were made when it comes to the brand?
Sure. I mean, we started out as, fan surprises. And we acquired a company called Social Rank, which was a fantastic, social insights platform. And now we have acquired Playr. And so bringing that all together, what Trufan has now is a unique platform that can really help marketers do three things. Basically, you can engage your audience and drive very specific CTAs. So if you want people to sign up for your newsletter, download your app, follow you on your platforms, it can help you do that. Second would be to understand more about your audience. So gaining audience insights and then segmenting them, finding new audiences. And those could be through many, many different ways to slice and dice audiences. And then the third one would be to be able to generate compliant and high quality first party data. That is increasingly becoming a need for a lot of marketers. And so I feel like the combined platforms are really of high value. And that's the direction that we're going in.
And so how do you position the new brand?
So there are very few direct competitors that we have. There are a lot of marketers doing, social marketing, basically. What they would like to do is they would like to get down to an individual in their marketing. They would like to understand the person who responded to their marketing and to be able to remarket to that person. Instead, with most of the social platforms, you're marketing to an anonymized audience, a customized audience, but you can't actually get down to what I would call social CRM. And then it's very hard to find new customers that way or to find insights. We're positioning ourselves as a social intelligence platform, but we're also expanding into engagement to be able to collect first party data.
Okay. Kind of talk to me a little bit actually on that note about the importance of first party data. Why are we seeing it become a more pressing issue as kind of time goes on?
Well, it's a perfect storm right now between increased privacy and pushback from consumers and, limits on platforms and devices. So, third-party cookies are going away, limits on mobile intelligence. Also, consumers want higher privacy or control over that. And then you're also seeing that brands want more ability to market to an individual. So all of those things coming together are creating this perfect storm where we're going back to old school CRM. Really, asking for permission to market to individuals, offering them something of value that they would be willing to let you do that. And it kind of comes down to being that simple. There are some interim solutions that are being offered by some of the platforms and devices, but they're really, I don't think that they're hitting the mark with marketers. And I honestly don't feel a lot of marketers are understanding the impact that's coming. At least I don't see a lot of discussion around solution beyond just going back to old school sort of CRM and asking people for their permission to market to them and contact information.
And so is a platform like the unified product, the Trufan product that's going to be coming out shortly, is that one of those innovative solutions? Like, is part of the positioning with the company and the mess going to be educating marketers on the importance of first party data now that third party data is being taken away?
Absolutely. So we are an advocate for not only collecting compliant first party data, but offering something of high value to those people that you're marketing to. And we're helping a lot of brands do that through campaigns. And so there's always a value exchange. Whatever way that you want to land that as a brand, you're offering something of value, you're asking to market to those customers.
I'm curious where you kind of land on with all the third party data kind of being restriction taken away. Where do you land on with all these decisions happening when it comes to consumer data privacy? I've talked to other marketers in the podcast in the past, and the spectrum is kind of like almost professionally, I don't like it because it makes my job harder to reach the customers I want. But personally, it makes sense and I'm glad we're doing it. It's kind of like, where do you land on when it comes to third party data being taken away and becoming harder to target your customers?
Yeah, I mean, marketers are consumers too, so we want it both ways, right? But I would say that it's an exciting opportunity, I think, for a lot of marketers to just get very smart again about real customer relationship marketing, to really understand your customers. Are you offering something of value to them? Are you being clear about the fact that you are collecting their data and that you will be marketing to them again? Are you giving them real ways to opt out of that marketing if they decide they don't want to? And so I think, it's a great opportunity for marketers that have not yet gone down that path, who've basically been sort of in the, you know, social or digital marketing ads world where they just keep slamming and slamming with interest-based ads or digital performance ads, and go down and do some real CRM, like really go down that path to understand what you need to do to understand your customers and to give them something of value.
So it's going to put a bigger emphasis on
Brand, and also I would say, looking holistically at your customer and at your marketing, and really being purposeful about what you're putting out there versus, slamming hundreds, maybe thousands of digital ads at someone.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you kind of envision Trufan when it comes to the rebranding? How do you communicate that, right? Because you said the tone of voice is going to be a little bit edgier is kind of what we're going for, but it's also you're trying to reach kind of the C-suite, the high-level marketer. So how do you balance that of not wanting to be a full-blown Wendy's on social media, but you want it to be a little bit more fun, kind of like a D2C brand? What's your approach to communicating this to the potential consumers?
Well, we're marketing to marketers. So we've got to understand what is really the opportunities and pain points right now with our customers, with our marketing customers. What are they living through? And I think just being a little bit humorous about some of the things that they're living through also helps. Maybe helping them discover some ways to do their marketing that they hadn't thought about or segment. Again, going back to sort of the audience reporting, that's one of the things that we can help surface. We can help surface some high value audiences. We can help surface some stories of how some of our customers are getting to new customer segments, and hopefully inspire some of them to look at their own marketing in a different way.
And then how do you go about establishing that brand voice? Is it just kind of updating the copy? Is it changing the website? Does all the elements of the brand kind of go along with that tone of voice? Like, for example, you can write it one way, but if you write it on a blue backdrop versus red backdrop, it might come across differently. So how do you approach shaping the voice of a brand?
I mean, to establish your brand voice, you've got to create distinction with your brand by reflecting, you reflect your mission and values. That's a great start. But again, you've got to cut through the noise. And so when I look back at the way our team actually communicates, we are fun and we're empowering and bold and professional, but we're also informative and direct. And so all of those elements will be, I think, part of our brand voice going forward. We also want to be a bit clever. So we also want to show our customers through our brand voice that we understand them and that we understand what they're going through. And I think being relatable in that way with our customers with clever copy while still being informative is sort of the way that we're going to test forward.
And what about the visuals? How does that kind of map back to the desired brand voice? Like, because it's a bluey purple for Trufan, correct me if I'm wrong. So like, how does that map back to the tone of voice and the positioning and everything?
Well, we looked at sort of the elements that, or the emotions that those colors invoke, and they really did invoke the right kind of feelings that we were looking for, which was, sort of high energy, trustworthiness, also high quality. And so we're really looking to bring that home in the visuals. And given that, visual creative is 50% of success in marketing, it's very important that we nail a consistent and, sort of on brand color palette for us.
And kind of with that consistency, talk to me then how Playr fits in, like how Playr fits into this puzzle, because you don't want it to be the exact same because it's two different products, for lack of two different brands under the same roof. So how do you determine what Playr's colors look like? Because it's kind of the angle I was going for is looking like they're from the same family, but they're not twins, right?
Right. So we did use the periwinkle blue as a consistent color between the two palettes to sort of make them look like or feel like they come from the same family. It also happens to be a color that is very predominant in gaming, I think, and felt very gamer-like for that Playr community. They already had a very kind of high energy, bright colors that I would say fit very well with their brand. And so we didn't go too far away from what they were already doing. I think what we did very well is we married the two logos. And so, we dropped the GG from Playr because we hope to expand the Playr brand beyond gaming into sort of adjacent communities of culture, I would call it. If you look at sort of the gamer audience, there are overlaps between gaming and sports and gaming and fashion and gaming and beverages and gaming and snacks and gaming in film. And so eventually we would like to grow that gamer community out to be a little bit more around some of those adjacent communities as well. So, but while still feeling, sort of core to the cool gamer roots that it has. But we also we got rid of the console and the logo and sort of made it more unified with the Trufan heart and stars. So,
And when it comes to things like in terms of the two brands, what else differs and what stays the same between the two rebranding? Because the values and everything between Trufan and Playr are going to stay the same, but will the voice change between the two brands? Because Trufan's going to be marketers and so is Playr, but Playr is also B2C, so it has to be a little more consumer facing. So is kind of the tone of voice and things going to be different between the two brands as well?
I think the tone of voice will be very similar. It'll still be very edgy, bold, and informative, but it'll just be very in tune with that community. So the customer of that Playr community is a consumer gamer. And so again, everything starts and stops with the customer, right? And so the message will clearly be different. And some of the cleverness that we hope to bring into that brand voice will be very specific to that customer.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious why edgy is the brand voice. Like, why do you think that'll be the one that resonates with with the consumer, what are some other potential options just to give the person listening this context of different other voices? Because I feel like when you look at social, a lot of brands are, especially when you think of edgy on social, you think of Wendy's. So what are some other potential voices, and why was edgy the right one for Trufan?
Well, I think edgy was the right one for Trufan because a lot of our customers are quite innovative. When they use platforms like Trufan, they are really testing into trying to find more out about their own customers, trying to establish new customer segments. They're really quite innovative in the way that they approach marketing and quite open. And so I feel like that edginess was appropriate because they are the person that is sort of breaking boundaries within their own brands. Um, Other potential voices that you could have, I mean, we're at the core, we're a B2B SaaS company, right? So we could have a very kind of techie, informative, very straightforward kind of performance based kind of brand marketing and voice. I think it would be we would be lost in that sea of sameness with other brands that have similar kind of tone. What we wanted to do is we wanted to be distinct. We wanted to really represent both the team that we have internally at Trufan and Playr, and we also wanted to reflect our customers who are quite innovative.
Is there a point where trying to stand out goes too far? Like, how have you tried to, one, still show that you're a tech company, you're a gaming focused company, but it's also that you don't want to just be complete different for the sake of just being different. So how do you kind of balance being different and innovative, but also representing the community that you're representing?
Yeah, I think that line gets crossed when your product starts to sound clever, right? Like you want your product to be super informative, very straightforward, clear, not confusing in any way. But I think cleverness can be based on insights. So, for example, if you find an insight out about your customers, then you can really get quite clever about it. We had one customer who was a snack company, and they discovered through our platform that they had a lot of followers who had exotic birds. Turns out that the popcorn and nuts that this company was selling were quite attractive to exotic birds, and therefore a lot of bird owners were posting and following that company and posting about their birds and the snacks. That's a great example of like you lean into the customer that you have, right? And they did, and they started creating content and really sort of creating connection with that customer base through the realities of them being exotic bird owners. So, they had some fun parrot memes and they had some things that were quite fun and clever, but it showed that they understood their customer at the core of it. And so I think that's where the cleverness comes in. I think where it should stop is in your product that needs to actually deliver and be quite serious. That's where it's not as appropriate to maybe have as much cleverness. You want to be clear and informative.
Do you think that's a common occurrence where there's different communities that use a brand's product that the brand doesn't realize?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's a big disconnect, particularly in, I think, some global brands between the customer that they want and the customer that they have. And so that's where social listening and also audience insights come in, where you really start to understand the customer that you do have. And that will allow you to lean more into that customer and be quite clever and resonate with them, basically, connect with them. But it can also help you discover new segments that you didn't know that you had. Micro segments within your customer base.
And you said it was more so with the bigger national brands where they're kind of going for a customer that they want instead of the customer that they have. In the context of Trufan or startups in general, is it better to market for the customer you want because you haven't established yourself yet, as opposed to marketing for the customer you have?
I think you have to do both at the same time. You need to embrace the customer that you have. And over time, you need to look at, if we wanted more of this kind of customer, what would we need to be in the world? What would we need to bring to the table? And is that realistic?
Okay. And does with kind of the rebrand of the company, does that trickle down to beyond just the marketing? Like, will that affect customer success? Will that affect the product? Will that just affect kind of the culture of the company as a whole?
I mean, yes, I think your marketing and your branding have an effect on your internal teams and also the way that you communicate in every part of the business. I mean, the reality is the brand is your touch point at every single part of the business, including the product. And so, we have collaborated across the business to do this rebrand. We haven't done it in a silo. Having said that, I think that it's highly reflective of who we are and who our customers are. So I feel really good about that.
So it's more so instead of having the brand trickle down and impact the company as it's organically shaped and evolved with the culture, that's kind of trickled down and is representative in the branding. So it's kind of the other way around.
It's both. It's really both. I think when you're really in touch with who you are as a company and who your customers are, your brand evolves with that. You want to be authentic, right? Like you can create the world's best brand, but if you can't stand up to that day to day, then there's usually an issue, right? Customers can tell.
And when it came to integrating the two companies, specifically so what is the structure then for Playr and Trufan? Is it one above the other? Are they kind of side by side? Like what's the specific structure for Playr and Trufan?
So Trufan is our B2B platform that is for basically audience intelligence. And then also Playr is our B2C community. But brands are leveraging our B2C community, Playr, to execute. So you can engage your audiences through Playr, but you can use the Trufan platform to understand your audience and find new audiences.
Okay. And so because of that, so for example, like in the context of Google and Alphabet, if you look at their brandings, Alphabet's doesn't look like Google. They have like a red branding versus the Google brand everyone knows. So because Playr and Trufan are kind of operating on the same level, it's not a parent company holding the other. Is that part of the reason why the brandings look so similar? Because like if it was, for example, if Trufan was above, you could have done different branding because they don't really interact. Because the brands interact so much, is that why they're very similar?
Yeah, we wanted them to really feel like they belong to the same family versus a house of brands, right? So when you go into our new product dashboard, you will see the uh, Playr logo as part of or Playr icon as part of our new unified product.
Mm. And then part of the decision to not go with the house of brands was to dissolve the social rank brand. And I'm curious why that was the decision.
There's a lot of confusion with customers, particularly customers that had come from social rank and now they're trying to figure out who's Trufan, social rank, then we acquired Playr. We had to create some uniformity and clarity in amongst the brands. And I think when you have a house of brands, you have, companies that are very distinct and they may or may not even interact with each other. They may just be umbrella brands under a parent company. And that was not the case. All of the companies we've acquired are actually coming together and unifying, not just in the brand, but also in the product.
And so with the unified product, why keep two brands separate and why not dissolve Playr and social rank into Trufan?
Because we wanted to have a B2C brand and a B2B brand. And I think they are two different audiences. And it would be very difficult, I think, to have one brand where you could have both.
So you can't have a brand that speaks to both audiences?
We might over time. I think it would have been too drastic a change at this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, I understand from that perspective. So with the Playr kind of with marketing for Playr, it's more so attracting new users to the platform to enter the giveaways and things like that. And then Trufan will strictly be for getting people to use the platform itself, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's B2B to C.
Yeah.
Think of it that way.
And so with the unified product, will we see the branding reflected in the product? Because right now I feel like with the social rank product, there is elements of the branding that's incorporated with currently without the rebrand, but is the new unified product going to look very cohesive with the rest of the branding?
Over time, yes. So, with our development roadmap will come some changes with sort of the way that branding is basically expressed through the platform. But yeah, over time, yes.
And kind of what's your strategy for rolling out a unified product? Is that something you've ever had to do before where two brands kind of melded into one product? And what's your approach to doing that?
I mean, it's not my approach, it's the company. And we have a very brilliant lead, Andrew, who's leading that effort. Yeah, I've worked in plenty of tech companies that have acquired, and some of them bigger than others. And the bigger companies tend to do one of two things: either they fold in, that company underneath the existing tech infrastructure, and those will become features within a larger product, or they will have a standalone product and it will have a distinct audience. And so in our case, we're bringing together everything, but it's a little different in that we have, again, B2B on one side and B2C on the other, or C to B2C on the other. So yeah, kind of like a two-sided marketplace, right? You can think about Amazon. You have buyers and sellers. On Trufan and Playr, you have marketers and you have consumers. So you can think about it that way: that marketers can access these high-value consumers through the Trufan platform.
Okay. And I know in the past, like on our previous podcast, you talked about how you were part of the team that helped rebrand T-Mobile. So how much does having experience rebranding a company benefit you when you're going through something like this again?
I think it's tremendously helpful. I've been through a lot of rebrands, not just with T-Mobile, but also with Western Union and a few other large brands that I've been a part of. It's part of the evolution of the company. I mean, you have to sort of refresh your brand along the way if you have any longevity. And as your customers, sort of age and evolve, and you want to appeal to another, younger segment, a digital segment, or you want to, just continue to be relevant with, customers that you've had for decades. I think you've got to do those brand refreshes along the way. It's just, otherwise your brand starts to look tired and, sort of not as relevant. There are a few brands that are timeless. Like I think of a brand like Tiffany's, for example, the blue box. It's pretty timeless. But even Tiffany's has updated their brand with the digital age and the kind of social marketing that they've been doing. And there's a lot of brands that you could think about sort of, that have evolved. Look at Google and Alphabet, right? That's a great example. And many others. Facebook properties, right? Instagram. You could probably put a timeline evolution of just the brands, underneath that and what it's looked like over the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm. As someone who's gone through many different rebrands, is there still things you've learned going through it once again this time?
Yeah. I mean, you can't go so drastic with a change. Customers tend to not like it so much. And they have a problem with it if it's something that is a utility brand that they use daily, like Google, or like, some of the more notable brands that we've seen do rebrands in the past. Uber would be an example. There's a lot of backlash if that change is dramatic. Customers really have a strong opinion about it. So I would say you kind of need to ease into your brand evolution at some point as well. You need to think about, maybe we will acquire more companies in the future, and how will that affect our brand going forward? Do you want to be able to establish a brand that has some extensibility for the future, and that you're not completely having to refresh things every few years?
Kind of on that note, should Trufan decide to acquire another company, with rebranding that company, like with Trufan and Playr, it was a good scenario where the brandings were different, but they were still kind of similar even coming into it. So should they acquire a company, let's say with like a red and green color scheme that's completely different from the other two, how do you factor that in, trying not to change it too much, but also wanting to kind of meld it into that family of brands that we have right now?
I think it'll be completely dependent on what that company is and what they bring to the table for the customer. And again, this all goes back to everything starts and stops with the customer. So, what is it that we're trying to offer through that new acquisition? Should it become a feature of a larger product and therefore part of a larger brand? Or is it a standalone in some way? So I think all those things we'll have to look at it if we ever get to that point. Right now, we're just trying to really strengthen and stand up the brand that we already are building with the companies that we have, the product we have.
And what advice would you give to someone who's about to enter or thinking of entering their own rebranding for their company, or even just branding their startup in the first place? Like, what is some of your advice, some of your top tips for someone in that scenario?
I mean, even if you want to just do what I would sort of call quick and dirty branding, right? You want to just sort of be agile. You don't want to go into a lot of depth. Maybe can't even afford to hire an agency. You just really need to understand your customer in depth. Who is your customer, and why are they buying from you? And what is it exactly that the brand promises that you are giving them? When they think about your brand, what is it that they think about that they are getting from you that is of high value that they cannot get elsewhere? If you can nail those things, you've kind of nailed the brand.
I love that. Is there, before we kind of jump into the other marketing questions, is there anything branding related that I missed before we kind of move on?
I would love, like, what do you think some of the world's best brands are? What are some of your favorite brands?
Some of my favorite brands, putting me on the spot here. I'm trying to think. I don't mean, comes to mind. I just personally like, when I think of the best brands, I think of kind of the most iconic brands. You know what I mean? Like when you said that, the first company that comes to mind is Coca-Cola.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like what I do with, when it comes to the best brands, that's just the most recognizable. And I do think time, being around for a long period of time, does factor into that. But I think you can have a great brand that's not instantly recognizable to everyone because you're in an early stage. So where my brain goes with that question is brands like Coca-Cola. I think of Amazon just because I see it everywhere. But in terms of like best brands, I don't know if I have a good answer, just kind of off the top of my head. Like, because my brain just goes, I mean, like Mercedes-Benz popped into my head. I don't even know where that came from, but that's just a logo that came in my head when I heard that question. So I'm kind of copping out of this answer, but I don't have any that jump to mind. Is there any that you that come to your mind when you hear that question?
I mean, an old favorite is obviously Apple. I love the way that Apple has evolved their brand over the years, and they keep refreshing their brand identity, but also as they have acquired companies or they have built features or built new products, they have evolved their positioning and who they are very effectively. And there's a lot of brand love for Apple, regardless of, some of the things that they've gone through. I would also say, though, Peloton to me is just such a great brand that feels like it's come out of nowhere and is just a phenomenal brand effort. I think that team has just done a great job. I think Twitch is standing up their brand marketing in ways that I hadn't expected. And, given the demand for their product and how tricky it could be to really be building a brand for streamers, I think they're doing a phenomenal job with branding. I would also look at, Xbox. It's one of my favorite brands, worked on that product for a while also. But, Twitter marketing recently did a throwdown with brands and Xbox came up victorious. So congratulations to them. But I do think it's well-deserved. I think they do a great job. And I think, one of the things that you can sort of distinguish about your brand, if you have one of those legacy brands that's been around for decades, are people really invested in your brand? You can tell people who are diehards. And we've seen some. Marketing Brew is a great example, right? Someone had a tattoo and now they're rebranding. So, that's a diehard evangelist of your brand.
I'm curious why you say Twitch is going about it in ways you didn't expect.
I think that they have made what could arguably be sort of a niche brand become super mainstream through effective branding. I think they've stood out, they've broken through the noise, and they have been appealing to gamers and then more broadly to streamers in a way that some of the other streaming platforms haven't been able to establish.
Okay. And kind of as we've been going through this, a brand that actually came to mind that I know you'll appreciate is Nugs. I think
Oh
they have
yeah.
just nailed their branding. Their messaging is great. Everything about it, I love it. Their website's awesome. So that is an answer. That's an actual answer that I will give is I really, really like the Nugs branding. They know who they are and they don't try to be anybody else.
Right. And they know who their customers are, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that I love about the Nugs brand is they're leveraging insights to be clever. So we go back to like, where's the line of being clever and where's the line of being informative with brand voice? And I think they're a great example, right? Like they've got a product that's basically non-meat chicken nuggets, right? I think they're made of soy or something similar. They know their customer, and they know that their customers believe that eating meat would be harmful to them or at least be unhealthy. And they've got a lot of clever bylines in there, right? Like killing you slower than maybe chicken nuggets would. They call themselves the Tesla of chicken, right? So they're high end, they're high quality, they're innovative, and all the things that would sort of evoke in emotions in their brand voice. But yeah, I think that's a great example.
And one thing I was curious to talk to you about last time when we recorded, for context for the person listening, when we recorded last time, we recorded in February and pandemic hadn't happened in North America yet. By the time the episode was coming out, pandemic was here in full force. So we jumped back on record like an extra 10 minutes to tack on the end of the podcast about how this pandemic was going to impact the marketing industry. Flash forward now, over a year later, I'm curious to hear kind of the follow-up to that conversation we had. How has marketing changed since the beginning of the pandemic just over a year ago?
I mean, how has marketing not changed in the last year? I feel like it has been the catalyst for, a 10 or 15-year evolution forward in digital for sure, e-commerce, all of the things that we thought would take, maybe another decade to sort of move forward, have moved forward instantly. A lot of brands that sort of saw their e-commerce retailers, for example, their e-commerce being like 15% of sales, now it's 40% of sales. I mean, that's a massive, massive leap forward. Services, Instacart, Uber Eats, all of the delivery stuff. Is that ever going to go away even when things open up again? I don't think so. I think that people are not going to want to go into the grocery stores in general when you can have it delivered. Work from home. There's just so many things that we could go down. But I do believe that this catalyst has a lot of silver linings in it. I feel like the digital evolution and transformation it's causing with a lot of brands and their marketing has been very, very positive. I think that once we get back out beyond this, this pandemic, I do think experiences are going to become more important. And people having been in lockdown for so long, the experiences that they're willing to pay for and the experiences that they want to have are going to be even more important to them. And so I think you'll see a huge surge back into, dining and travel and all the things that we haven't been able to do over the last few years. But I think that people are going to demand higher quality experiences than they've had in the past.
Really, eh? Higher quality?
Not necessarily more luxurious, but I think they're going to want very personalized experiences. And I think they're going to want to focus on the things that matter to them and the people that matter to them.
Mhm. Fair enough. That's a good point. I mean, like, I feel like I'm ready. I mean, I'm ready for an experience of any kind right now. I've been cooped up in my
Right.
apartment for far too long. Like, I am ready, willing, and able for an experience at any point in time now. So I'm 100% on board with that. Do you think, kind of with people leaving homes in full force once this is over, are we going to see a return to more out of home advertising? Do you think that's going to kind of pick up again?
No doubt. I mean, I would be surprised if it wasn't. I mean, it's always been a very effective medium, and surprisingly digital. That industry really nailed being able to sort of quantify their ROI in a digital world. So they did a great job. I think cinema marketing will become another, people going back into theaters. I hope that happens, into Broadway and back into movie theaters. I hope that happens because it's something that I personally love. But do I think that cinema marketing is going to change dramatically? Absolutely. With movies starting to be released digitally versus in theaters, it's going to massively change what we see in theaters.
And so you said you love the theater experience. I had this debate with a friend the other day of what movie would you pay for to watch in your home versus what wouldn't you pay to watch in your home?
I mean, I've paid for a lot of the current movies that are coming out just out of sheer boredom and, lack of, sort of choice. But I think going forward, when I have a choice, that's a good question. I think in the future, it would only be for movies that I really loved and I really wanted to own, like that I would be willing to buy the DVD.
Yeah, fair enough. And one other thing too, last time when you were on the podcast, and you've even talked about throughout this podcast, the importance of the consumer and doing everything kind of through your consumer. I have a quote written down here, and you said you spent a lot of your career on social mobile because that's where consumers have been. But if consumers were in VR tomorrow, that's where you'll be. So, how have you been able to kind of stay on the forefront of everything? Like, what do you do to stay on top of the ever evolving marketing landscape?
I mean, I read a lot. All of the social platforms and, sort of prominent brands, I read their blogs daily. I read, a lot of insights and research and all of the reports that I can get my hands on. I'm like a sponge that way. I also talk to customers and consumers a lot. And I also I try out everything new. So, as soon as Clubhouse is out, I'm on it. As soon as TikTok was out, I'm on it. I think you have to be willing to sort of try those experiences and then see how they might land in your customers, day to day. But listening, I think you can never go wrong with listening.
Is Clubhouse a fad?
I think Clubhouse will be around for a long time, but I think someone's going to acquire them. I think social audio is a strong, feature going forward. Is Clubhouse enough to be standalone? I don't think the way it is today, maybe if it were to transform itself. It hasn't really built a community yet. It's built interest, but there's not a strong day-to-day community the way there is on social networks.
Talking about how they can build a community, just as like from a brand's perspective, because that's something you've done really well through your career is building communities. So what is something Clubhouse can do that can allow them to foster and create a better community?
They're starting to embrace creators, right? They're embracing creators and they're enabling them to monetize in Clubhouse, and they're giving them tools that will allow them to manage the rooms and the sessions, the events that they want to have. But I think, will someone come every single day, all day, to listen and to audio and speak? Probably not. We already see Zoom fatigue, right? I guess the question is, how do you build community around just audio?
Through your career, when it comes as it applies to community building, are there any through lines? Like, are there things that have applied from the beginning of your career that still apply today, and are there things that used to apply that don't apply anymore?
Things that apply, I would say, be yourself, bring your whole self to work and be authentic. Don't try to change yourself for a brand or for a workplace. You've got to just be yourself, and you will find the people that you enjoy working with and the customers that you enjoy marketing with. Another one I would say is just listen to your customer. You cannot go wrong with listening to customers, but you have to really be open to hearing the good and the bad. And you have to be open to really taking something that they say as a hypothesis that you could do better. Hearing an insight from a customer that can then translate into an improvement in your product or a different way of communicating to them can really change your brand. And I would say then, another thing that is true is that just do work that you love. Everything else will come along with it. Money, positions, opportunities, great people, do the work that you love. And when you focus on that, it's going to be obvious that you love that work. And that's always, something that I try to live by. And the few times in my life that I've taken work that I wasn't sure if I'd like it or not like it, and then found out that I really didn't like it, it definitely took me back to the work I love, because I feel like life is short. Do things that you love and are passionate about.
To that point there, I was talking to Tyler Babbitt on the podcast, and he said you got to do those things that you don't love to figure out exactly it is what you do love.
True.
But what do you do in the situation where you don't know what you love, or you don't know what it is that you're passionate about?
Mm. I mean, I think this goes back to finding your purpose, right? I think trying a lot of things out then and failing fast would be a way to go to quickly find out that you do or do not like something. The only way, you're right, the only way you're going to do that is to get out and try a lot of different things.
One other thing, all my questions from our previous podcast I left till the end here. One other thing we talked about on the last podcast was early on when you first moved to Silicon Valley, you said you'd get like different email threads that would come through for just like meetups, and you'd go to places and there'd be like Craig's from Craigslist, and you'd all be there kind of having conversations. Is there any conversations that you had at any of those meetups early on during the .com boom that still stick with you to this day?
Conversations, but also just maybe observations. I think in the early days of .com, one of the things that really struck me and has stuck by me was, I mean, in those days you could get funding from, throwing together like 10 slides with a concept, and that was, you ran with it, right? The ease of kind of entrepreneurialism. And I'm not in any way pretending that building a company or getting it funded is easy, but it's maybe not as hard to get going as some people may think it is. If you really have a great idea and you're passionate about it, you believe in it, and you're willing to work hard, there's a lot of people who will help you build that company and help you fund it. So that definitely was something that stuck with me. And then also just innovation. Like there's sort of a lot of, sort of legacy marketers telling you that there's rules for this and rules for that. I mean, the only rules that I live by are really what my customer wants. I think willing to try new things, be innovative all the time, and always be open to hearing how things can be better is really, really served me well. And that's definitely something you see in Silicon Valley. I mean, companies are just constantly innovating at an insane rate. And then I just think, personal relationships, you can never go wrong with building personal relationships. I'm really fortunate to have worked with a lot of different people across multiple brands that I really loved working with. And at the end of the day, I think the people you work with make or break your experience in a company.
One other question I had for you is, are we going to start seeing some of your own clothing come out someday? I know you collect vintage clothing patterns. Are you going to start putting some clothing out soon?
I don't think so. I just do that for fun. I have thought about, though, maybe doing some patterns, like maybe designing some patterns that I would commercialize. But yeah, no, I think I'm going to stick to marketing for a while.
But kind of on that note, how important is it to have hobbies and things that you do outside of work that you don't try to monetize? Because I feel like right now, as soon as anyone has a hobby, they try to figure out how to turn it into a business. But like, how important is it to have something that doesn't need to become a business that you do in your life?
I mean, personally, I need a lot of that. I recently got a puppy, so we have a dog. That gets me outside walking and keeps me busy in fun ways that I had forgotten that I loved. I think it keeps your mind, always on something new and exciting, and really challenges you in different ways. I think when you have those kind of personal hobbies, it makes you better at work, particularly when you're in creative role.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any favorite mistakes?
Oh boy. I think it's less about the favorite mistakes. I think it's what do you learn from mistakes? I've seen people making the same mistakes over and over and over in their career, staying in jobs that they hate or industries that they don't like, or, continuing to do a certain kind of marketing that is declining in its performance and not really even thinking about maybe we should do something different. I see a lot of that. I see people who are kind of like in their digital performance marketing, kind of role, or in their social role, or in their, whatever media role. And they don't ever think about, wow, this is, the performance of the marketing I'm doing isn't working. What else could I be doing? Or should I be looking at my marketing more holistically? And just, I think, maybe not understanding the customer the way you should be.
How often do you take the time to reflect on your whole career and everything that you've accomplished up to this point?
I really don't that much. I just keep moving forward. I move, forward in what I've got in front of me. And right now, growing out Trufan's brand and growing out our performance marketing is really my focus. I think it's great for time to time to look back, but I'm really looking forward right now.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you the same standard set of questions I ask everyone at the end of every interview. I'm pretty sure we did this last time, so it's going to be interesting to see how the answers differ and stay the same, as kind of after going through a global pandemic, kind of what the answers are like on the other side. But my first question is: you're going to dinner. You can take 3 people. It can be anybody dead or alive. Who do you take to dinner?
Oh boy, my grandmother. Um, I loved her a lot, and she was like a second mom to me. My husband, I love him dearly, and even through a pandemic, want to spend more time with him. And then, probably somebody who, like a thought leader that I would love to kind of have a conversation with. Jack Ma is somebody that I would love to meet in person and has kind of disappeared off the radar. And so somebody like that, I would love. Elon Musk, you know.
Mm. What's some of the best advice you've ever been given?
My grandmother gave me some great advice, which is to let go of other people's good regard, which really means don't worry about what other people think of you.
What's something about yourself people wouldn't expect?
I think I'm kind of, I'm sort of introverted at heart. I'm a very creative person. I'm somewhat introverted, but then when I'm around other people, I can be extroverted.
What's one thing that's so important everybody needs to know?
Spend time on things that matter because life is short.
I like that. And for the last question, I like to flip the script a little bit. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. So pretend you have a crystal ball and you can ask this crystal ball any question, you'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you want to know the answer to?
Did I spend enough time with those people that mattered to me?
That's a good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked that specific question before, and I really like that question. Well, Karen, I want to thank you so much for taking time to be on the podcast once again. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you got right now.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I just love coming to this podcast and love the conversations that we have. People can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Karen O'Brien, Obrien. And on Twitter and Instagram, I'm Bond Jane Bond.
Awesome. Well, make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below so people can find it. And I want to thank you once again for taking time to be on the podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening, whether you've listened the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone, do me a big favor. Go and follow Karen. Go and connect with her on LinkedIn. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. Like I said, if you'd like to follow me, you can find me anywhere on social media at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.